Continuing on with our friend application, we're going to now write the update and delete methods for our content provider. So let's get into that. Okay, I'm just going to make a bit more space here so we can sort of see a bit more on the screen. Okay, so I need to override a few more methods. The first one is update. Update. Okay, looks like it's going to want to go down there. All right, so update, as you can see the options, a URI, which is always passed, content and values, which we've talked about, a selection, and selection arguments are the parameters that are passed. So what we need to do is we need to do our standard things. We might do some logging as well, and we'll just copy these first few things. And we'll paste those in. We'll make that update, just so we know what we're working with. And of course, update is where you've got a record that already exists on the database, in the table, in this case friends, and you want to update the value. So you want to change the name to something else, the phone number or email, or all three. So we've got our database reference, we've got our match set, so we can figure out what to do. So the options here now, in this case, because we're updating an existing record, the only valid option should be our friends underscore ID, because if we don't get an ID, we can't really update the record. Now this is where things can get a little bit dangerous, because what we're going to do is we're going to accept both options, friends, do nothing, break, in case friends underscore ID. And we're just going to put our default and throw if there's an error, if there's anything else. Now you might be looking at that and thinking that's probably not a problem, but what this means by accessing or allowing both friends and friends underscore ID, it's possible for you to call this update, and if you don't provide an ID for a particular record, this process will automatically update all records in the table. So if you had 100 records, all with different names and email addresses and so forth, by calling this function update without a valid ID, it would update all records. So keep that in mind, that it's just a nasty thing to fall into, making a mistake and finding that all your records have been overwritten. So what you could probably do if you wanted to, you could take that code out there so that we only accept something, a friend's ID that's got an ID that's been passed to us. So in this case, friends ID, the reason we need to put some code in here is we need to find out what the ID was, much like we did in the query section, where we use this function here, string ID equals friends contract friends.get friend ID. So we need to do the same. I'm going to copy that code. So we need to extract out the ID that's been passed to us so we know which record to update. So I'm going to do that. We've got the ID now. So what we're going to also do is we're going to create another field here. We're going to call it string selection criteria. I'm going to start off having that to be the value of selection. Selection has been what's been passed to us as a selection criteria. Often that will be null. In fact, we'll be only using null, but it's a good habit to get into to make sure you save what's been passed to us. So, and it'll make more sense once you see this as moving forward. So we're going to type selection criteria equals. This is our base way to access the data. We're going to put a where clause in effectively. That's base columns dot ID plus equals ID. So in other words, we're putting a where ID underscore ID equals and whatever the number is pertaining to that record plus text user. So we're only going to process this bit here if it's empty. If it's not empty, I should say, is empty. And I just made a mistake there. Now you might be wondering, why have I set selection here to that value and then also sort of reset the selection criteria? And that's in the case where we're doing nothing. When we're updating all the records, we still want to record the official or the original value of selection. So the selection criteria is going to be used in both instances. The first case, we're not actually changing the value, but the second case, we are. So what this line does, it sets the where clause. So in other words, we're updating only the record we're working on, the record that we've passed. So we're only updating one record only. And then what we're also doing here is we're saying, but if there was a selection that was passed to us, if that isn't null or empty, so in other words, if it's like blank or it's null, so long as it's not the case, we're going to add this extra bit of SQL into the end of it and also include that. So that would be like where underscore ID equals 1 and whatever else was passed to us. We're not actually going to be using that in this app, but I just wanted to show you how you would do that to preserve the selection that was passed through to us. Okay, so moving on. So it's now looking okay. So the other thing we need to do now, we've got our default in there. So we're only accepting the two options, friends and friends underscore ID. We're grabbing the ID if there is one in the case of the friends underscore ID. Now we need to do the process itself, and what we need to do is we type int update count, because with an update or a delete you don't get the ID like you do for an insert, you get the number of records affected. db.update, and it's tables.friends values selection criteria selection args. So we're just preserving, in the case of selection args, what was passed to us, and of course selection we talked about previously. So that then does the update to the database, and it returns a number relating to how many. So actually what we could do, just to make it easier, we could just type return. So we're returning the number of records that were updated. So that's our update method written. So lastly, we now need to handle the delete. So I'm going to override delete. And you can see it's got a URI, and you've got the selection and selection args. So we're going to do much the same as we've done before. We're going to copy some of that code. So save us having to retype it again. But I'll get rid of the selection criteria. We won't need that. And delete. And of course it hasn't got values, so I'm just going to delete those. Okay. And we've got our first switch in there. Delete operates exactly the same as update. If we're going to accept both, and I'm just going to copy this code, and we're just going to change a bit of it to save us typing it all again. So if we're going to accept everything, what that means is if you just pass this, if you call delete and you haven't specified a friend's ID, it's going to delete all the records in the table. So in this case, we're going to get rid of that selection criteria. So we've got, in that case, it's going to delete all the records. And look, you may want to do that sometimes, so that's why we're leaving that functionality in there. But we also need to do add some code in the case where you only want to delete a single record. Actually, what I'll do is I'll change that. What we'll do is we'll take that out. I only allow you to delete a specific record, but I'm going to also put an option in so you can delete the entire database. I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's just add the code for the friend's ID first. And I probably should have deleted that selection criteria. Never mind. Selection criteria. So it's base columns dot ID. You've seen this before, equals plus ID. What I'll do, I'll just copy the entire line. So we're going to do exactly the same principles as we explained before. String, but we, okay, so that's done. And then we're going to actually return, so within this case, db dot delete tables.friends, of course, selection criteria, selection arguments. So of course we don't need a break anymore, and default anything else is going to return an error. But what we'll also do is we'll put some code up here. Let's put some code just after the log, and we'll put if URI dot equals friends contract dot base content URI. Let's delete the entire database. So delete database, return 0. We need to return a nominal number. Remember, the as with the update, the int for delete returns the number of records that were deleted. In this case, because we're creating a new database, we're just returning 0 as a nominal number. You could make that -1 or some other number to make, for the code at the other end know what's happened. But in this case, returning 0 is just fine. So what we've done is we've looked at the base content URI, and again, the base content URI is just the base content authority. It hasn't got a path or an ID. And what we're saying is if someone calls this method just with that, we're going to delete the database. But if they call it not with the base content, but also with a path set and an ID, we're going to call this code. That's just a way of sort of handling both conditions there. So that's now the basic code for the content provider written. In the next video, we're going to add the code necessary to get this working in the manifest file.